A road flare burned in the distance, but no one was holding it. The highway was empty, and the night had settled over the mountain pass like a wet blanket. Fog clung to the road, a thick, cold smear that dulled the headlights and softened the edges of the world. My tires hissed over the asphalt, the sound unnaturally loud in the absence of other vehicles. Every mile, the air grew colder, pressing against my skin through the thin fabric of my jacket, carrying the scent of damp stone and pine resin. That's when I saw it. A flare burned in the distance, red and furious against the darkness, a trembling beacon on the shoulder. It arced slightly in the windless night, its smoke curling upward in slow spirals. There was no car, no person, no evidence of anyone nearby holding it. I slowed instinctively, gripping the wheel tighter, the hiss of the flare almost drowning out the sound of my own pulse. The flare's light painted the fog in deep crimson, throwing the nearby trees into stark relief. Branches stretched at impossible angles, gnarly and angular, as if the forest itself were leaning toward the road. Shadows undulated where the light didn't reach, thickening into forms that seemed to bend the air. I squinted, thinking it might be a deer or a hiker, but the roadside remained empty. Curiosity, or perhaps compulsion, drew me closer. Every step toward the flare felt measured, deliberate, as if the road itself slowed or hastened beneath the tires. The asphalt became slicker, darker, absorbing the light instead of reflecting it. Each reflection of the flare in the puddles was slightly off, not matching the flare's flicker but lagging by a fraction of a second, like reality itself was stretched. I stopped my car 50 feet away, unsure why I didn't just drive past. The flare hissed sharply, small embers lifting and disappearing into the fog. It illuminated a stretch of asphalt where the paint lines twisted, curving subtly in ways I knew they shouldn't. The texture of the road beneath my feet felt wrong, soft, almost spongy, as if the surface had absorbed the heat of the flare and reshaped itself around it. That's when I noticed it. A figure crouched at the far edge of the light. Not human, at least not completely. Its shape was vaguely humanoid, but wrong, elongated arms, legs that bent slightly too far, shoulders too broad. It froze when my gaze fell on it, disappearing immediately into the fog the moment I tried to focus. Yet its presence lingered, an indentation in the air, the cold pressing against me more sharply, almost tactile. I fumbled for my phone, trying to call someone, anything, but the screen glowed only dimly, signal absent. The flare seemed to pulse in response, its light thickening, spreading in waves along the fog as if testing the distance between me and whatever watched. I tried to reason, telling myself it was a prank, a stranded driver, maybe someone trying to signal. But the windless night, the absolute silence, and the unnatural curves in the asphalt refused explanation. Another flare ignited farther down the road, perfectly aligned with the first. I hadn't seen anyone place it. My stomach nodded. Each flare flickered in time with my shallow breathing, or perhaps it only seemed so, a distortion of perception. Shadows now slid across the roadside without wind. The trees' silhouettes warped, as if bending toward the light, stretching their branches in a silent, collective reach. I stepped out of the car, boots crunching on gravel, my breath steaming in the cold. The red light spilled across the fog, revealing the shoulder fully. There, lying in the grass, was my own jacket, one I hadn't taken with me tonight. The color was right, the seams exact, but it reeked faintly of smoke and pine, as if it had been abandoned here for hours, even though I knew I had left it at home. My heart hammered. I leaned closer, trying to rationalize. Perhaps a deer had dragged it. Perhaps someone had left it as a marker. But the jacket didn't feel like fabric. It felt like a vessel, humming faintly under my fingers, vibrating against my skin in a rhythm I recognized. I shivered, stepping back as the flare's hiss intensified. The fog thickened, moving like water over the asphalt, carrying shapes with it. Shapes that were not fully formed but suggestive, hints of motion that avoided definition. The figure reappeared briefly in the flare's glow, crouched by the second flare. I blinked, and it was gone. But its absence carried weight, as if something unseen had simply stepped out of the light to observe me more closely. I noticed, for the first time, that the light behaved unnaturally. The flare's glow bent around corners I knew didn't exist, creating shadows and highlights that defied geometry. I spoke aloud, shaky, "Who's there?" My voice echoed against the fog, flattened and distorted. The flare pulsed violently, and in that light I saw, briefly, the reflection of a person standing behind me. When I turned, no one was there. The reflection lingered in the surface of a puddle, crimson and molten, but no physical presence accompanied it. Panic rose, slow and grinding. I returned to the car, doors locking automatically in the fog-thick night. Every sound, the hiss of tires on wet asphalt, the faint rustle of leaves, even my own breathing, was amplified and warped. The flare burned steadily, red and insistent, a signal not of help but of notice. I realized I hadn't arrived at this road. I had been found. I started the engine. Headlights cut through the fog, but the flare stayed in the distance, moving slightly with every motion I made. It hovered on the shoulder, unheld, unwavering. The asphalt under my tires bent subtly, curves shifting, subtle rises and dips forming with each second, as if the road itself was curating my path. Every reflection, every shadow, every gleam of light suggested intelligence. The flare's light illuminated cracks in the asphalt that were not there before, subtle distortions that formed patterns I could not read but instinctively understood as deliberate. I drove faster, tires spraying thin ribbons of water, and yet the flare remained visible. I turned, swerved, slowed, and each time it remained, each time it seemed to anticipate me. I knew, somewhere deep in the fog and in the hiss of burning phosphorus, that the flare was waiting, observing, and perhaps deciding something about me. I never reached the next curve or the safe stretch beyond it. The flare's red light now filled the windshield, diffuse and encompassing, painting the fog in unbearable detail. The forest creeping closer, the trees bending toward the road, the cracks in the asphalt pulsating subtly, as if breathing. I pressed the accelerator, heart hammering, knowing that the flare was not a marker for help. It was a message, and I understood with a cold certainty that I had already been noticed. The next exit ramp, the highway stretched in obsidian silence, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the dark, undisturbed forest. Rain from hours ago had left the road slick, reflecting the occasional flicker of distant, broken streetlights like dying stars. I drove alone, the hum of the engine and the soft rhythm of tires on wet pavement the only sounds I could trust. A thin mist had begun to rise from the forest floor, curling across the lanes in lazy tendrils, clinging to the headlights, softening the edges of the trees into something more like shadow than timber. I noticed the sign first because of how wrong it looked. A green rectangle glowing faintly in the fog read, "Next exit, 2 miles." But the number had flickered, first 2, then 3, then 2 again. The highway had been empty for miles, and yet the sign seemed to stretch, elongate, as if it wanted me to read it differently each time. I squinted through the windshield, the wipers swiping away only a thin sheen of moisture, leaving more haze behind than it removed. The exit ramp appeared suddenly. One moment I was following the highway, and the next the road veered sharply right, the lane markers vanishing into a thick, rolling cloud that had lowered itself onto the asphalt like a living thing. The fog swallowed my headlights almost immediately, leaving only a faint glimmer of the white lines beneath my tires. I slowed instinctively, but the ramp felt impossibly long. Its slope was unnatural, a gradient that defied memory. Each glance upward through the fog revealed nothing but an endless gray ceiling, low and suffocating, as if the clouds themselves had weight. The first sensation was vertigo, though the road was perfectly straight. My stomach twisted, but there was no visible incline, no horizon to measure. My headlights cut through a few feet of white, illuminating reflective road markers that shimmered and multiplied, like the same markers repeated over and over. I caught glimpses of trees through the fog, but their trunks bent at impossible angles, stretching and curling toward me like frozen hands. Then I noticed the signs. They began to repeat. Caution, ramp ahead. Caution, ramp ahead. Exit 2 miles. Exit 2 miles. I had passed them before. I was certain of it. But now, they seemed farther apart and closer at the same time, blinking in and out of existence. My GPS chirped, recalculating again and again. Continue on current road for 1 mile. Then, turn onto exit ramp in 3 miles. Then, recalculating, you are off route. My pulse quickened. There was nowhere to be off route. There was only this road, this ramp, this fog. I tried to call someone. My phone showed signal bars. Then nothing. Then a weak 3G icon that glowed dimly. No call connected. No text sent. The dashboard clock spun in small, imperceptible jerks, time stuttering, then skipping. A minute passed in what felt like an eternity, though I could not be sure. There was a presence or something I felt rather than saw. At first, it was a vague awareness at the edge of perception, like being watched through a screen. The hair on my arms rose. My hands gripped the wheel tighter. I glimpsed shapes in the fog, tall, thin, motionless, but they never moved closer. They simply existed, just outside the range of headlights, silhouetted by the gray-white light of the ramp. Every so often, I felt the road itself guide me, nudging the car slightly left or right, correcting my steering with a subtle, impossible precision. A low hum began to resonate through the car. Not from the engine, not from the speakers. Somewhere beneath the floor, vibrating through the tires, through the metal, through the very air. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was the wind, the fog, the tires on wet asphalt, but it persisted. A pulse in rhythm with my own heartbeat. And then the clouds. Faint at first, barely perceptible light within their mass, like luminescent fog worms winding through the gray. Pulsed once, twice, then in a slow, deliberate cadence. The ramp's length became disorienting. I had been driving for what felt like hours, yet the signs and markers repeated endlessly. I passed a bend in the road, expecting a reconnection with the highway, but the asphalt continued to curl upward. My stomach churned. I could feel altitude without seeing it, an invisible rise, a sensation of height as if the clouds were pressing against my tires from above. The edges of the ramp seemed to thin, the guardrails disappearing into the fog. Sometimes, when the fog thinned just enough, I thought I could see landscapes below me. Forests folding into themselves, rivers bending at impossible angles, lights like distant cities, yet all wrong, all too quiet. The hum grew louder, resonating within my chest. The fog thickened again, swallowing even the rearview mirror's reflection. I glanced down at the speedometer. It was fluctuating wildly, swinging from 35 to 60 miles per hour and back in a fraction of a second. I pressed the brakes gently, half expecting to stop the sensation of ascending, but the car continued, obedient to some invisible force. I began talking aloud. Okay. Where is this? What is this? My voice sounded strange, distant, like it came from underwater. I laughed, shakily, trying to impose sanity on the scene. Then I saw it, a flash of movement in the clouds above. A shape that was vaguely human, elongated, arms raised, moving just beyond the fog's veil. It didn't approach. It didn't signal. It merely existed, watching, guiding, or perhaps waiting. I could not tell. The road signs finally stopped. No repeating numbers, no warnings, no mile markers. Only the ramp, disappearing endlessly into the clouds, now thick and undulating. The light inside the fog pulsed stronger, a muted pinkish glow that spread like liquid behind the mist. I tried to turn around, to descend, but there was no way down. The ramp curved only upward. I was trapped in ascent. Time fragmented further. I lost count of minutes and miles, if such measures still had meaning here. My car became a small island of solidity in a sea of fog and light. The presence remained, intangible but palpable, a constant weight in my chest, a reminder of something older than me, older than the highway, older than roads themselves. And then the twist. At the horizon of fog, where the ramp should have ended or merged, there was nothing but more clouds. They pulsed brighter now, almost hypnotically, a deep, living rhythm. The pulsing seemed to respond to my gaze, and I realized I could not see the edges of the ramp, nor the point where it might have connected to the world below. It simply continued, vanishing into a sky that should not exist at this altitude, a fog that should not be this dense. I slowed the car, bracing for some revelation, some break in the clouds. But nothing came, only the hum, the pulse, and the fog that now wrapped around the vehicle like a sentient cocoon. The ramp never rejoined the highway. The presence stayed at the periphery, patient, impartial, watching, and the clouds, thick, pulsing, unnatural, hinted at something beyond comprehension, something not meant for human understanding, waiting for me to look too long, to drive too far. I gripped the wheel and continued upward. The fog swallowed the headlights. The hum resonated through the frame of the car. The clouds pulsed from within, alive, waiting, and the exit ramp kept climbing into nothing, into the unknown.